Hi, I'm Andrew Berry and welcome to my YouTube channel. We're going to be looking at what you need to solder. Soldering techniques is one of the most searched for videos on YouTube. It's also one of the most requested techniques that we show and demonstrate on At The Bench. Atthebench.com is our online jewellery training website where we have over 1,000 films available for At The Bench members to watch. It covers all sorts of films such as marketing, promotions, jewellery making, tools, techniques, and so on. In front of me here is a basic soldering kit. I've been a professional jeweler now for coming up to 30 years, so I really do know what it takes to get a successful solder joint. And to get that solder joint right first time is like magic when you start. And what we have in front of us is literally all that you need. This is a basic soldering kit. This type of kit you can get from most jewellery tools suppliers. In the UK, this is a kit that has been put together by Sutton Tools. That's suttontools.co.uk. And it involves a very small amount of equipment, not expensive either. We have got here a very simple creme brulee torch, very small, gas filled. You can use the butane canisters that you use to light and to refill cigarette lighters, and that is all you really need to start. On At The Bench, 90% of all our projects that we do, we simply use that small little torch, and that is all you really need to start off with. You don't need to start buying the Sievert torches or the Rothenberger torches or the oxygen and propane torches. You don't even need to get to that level yet. Start off with something that is very simple, a simple on-off ignition and one knob just to adjust the intensity of the flame. There are lots of fluxes. Flux, what is a flux? It's a liquid that enables the solder to flow and also to protect the area that you're soldering. There are lots of fluxes out there. My favourite is a borax cone, and it's an unglazed dish. This is something that I have been using all my professional life. I've tried other types of fluxes out there, but I will always go back to a borax cone. Why? It's so simple, it doesn't go off, it can be transported easily because borax is a natural substance, it's not classed as a hazardous material. So really it is very, very safe. The unglazed dish, it has to be unglazed because it must be slightly rough. You don't have to use an unglazed dish. Something like a slate or an old bit of stone that you can basically turn the borax cone on with a little bit of water just to make a bit of creamy flux. We have a soldering block. This is not asbestos. You do not get asbestos blocks these days, but this is a very simple, I was going to say a fire brick, but that's very misleading. This is more of a soldering block. You can also buy soldering pads as well in various sizes. Don't be tempted to get something like a fire brick. Why? Because a soldering block and a soldering board will reflect the heat back at you. It doesn't absorb, doesn't take the heat away like a fire brick would. So if you have any bricks that you've got from an old kiln or an old house brick, something like that, don't use it because that sucks and saps the heat away and absorbs it into the block or into the brick. The soldering block that we've got here will reflect it. So when the heat goes at it, it'll be brought back towards you. Not necessarily in your face, but brought back towards the job that you're going to be working on. A third hand is very, very handy. It's very simple. A pair of cross-lock tweezers that you squeeze the handles and the jaws open, and that is mounted upon like an articulated joint that is on a weighted base, and that enables you to move this around in whichever position you want. You can put the item that you want to solder within the jaws and you can angle this in whichever way you want, or you can use it for holding a piece whilst you're soldering. When it comes to holding something whilst you're soldering, you need a pair of tweezers. You need a pair of stainless steel tweezers, good stainless steel tweezers. I think these are AA, that's a particular code that they put on tweezers, and they're quite of a needle point. They come to quite a sort of a nice narrow point, ideal for picking up your pieces of solder or picking up your pieces of work, and you can even just gently use these to immerse them in your safety pickle, which is like a safety acid, but we'll come to that a little bit later. You'll need some solder. Don't use plum solder or lead solder. Always have proper hard solder. Silver solder if you're using silver, gold solder if you're using gold. It comes in various forms. It comes in a paste, it comes in wire, it comes in strips, and also comes in various grades called enameling, hard, medium, and easy. Those are the three that you really need to use. The easy, the medium, and the hard. They relate to the temperatures that the solder melts at. So the very highest point melting point is an enameling solder. You would use that when you're creating a piece where it needs to be enameled, because the heat that involves enamel is very, very high. We would not necessarily need to use that when we come to solder normal pieces of jewellery. So the next melting point solder is going to be a hard solder. This melts at a high temperature. I'm sorry, I don't know what temperatures the solders melt at. I don't find that's very helpful, but it's always handy to know when the solder is going to melt. So a hard solder melts at a high temperature, way before the metal starts to melt. You've got a medium solder. That will melt at a slightly lower temperature than the hard solder. Then you've got an easy solder. That will melt at a lower point than the medium solder. There is an extra easy, but we don't use extra easy. Why? Because in the UK here, we need to get items hallmarked if it's above a certain weight, and extra easy solder, there's just not enough silver in it and it's not classed as hallmarking quality, so we don't use it. So we use an easy, a medium, and a hard solder. You can have whatever solder you want to practice with, but once you start to come to create your pieces, it's always better to start off with a higher melting point solder for the first particular joint in a job that you're putting together, or a ring or a pendant or something like that. And then the last solder joint, you really want to come down progressively to an easy solder. But when you're practicing, just stick with the hard solder just to get used to it, to understand how the solder flows and the properties. You'll need some gas to fill your torch, and also once you've soldered the piece, there's going to be oxides on it, there's going to be some flux on it, and you need a way of getting that off the metal. In the olden days when I was young, you used to have sulfuric acid, and you always used to mix a mixture of 10% sulfuric acid to 90% water. And remember, PAW, pour acid into water, PAW, because if you put the water into the acid, it is likely for the solution to erupt and spit, and that would be no good to you, very detrimental to your health. So always pour acid into water. But nowadays we have something that's called safety pickle. It is still quite dangerous. It's not something that you need to leave around if you're eating or in the kitchen, anything like that, but it is not an acid like sulfuric acid, and you can get that in a container like this, and you can mix that up with some warm water. Always best to use it warm if you possibly can. You can use it cold by all means. You can dip the item into it. The action of the acid, and I'll call it acid, the safety pickle, will be a little bit slower to get the oxides off. So that really is all we need. We have our torch, we have our flux, we have our soldering block, we have our third hand with our tweezers, cross-lock tweezers in, we have our normal tweezers, bit of solder. One thing I forgot is a brush, a small little, it can be a natural hairbrush or a nylon hairbrush. We need this just to be able to take some of the borax from our dish and paste it onto our joint, or even for picking up small little pieces of solder just to locate and just pop it exactly where we need it upon our job. So a brush, our safety pickle, and our gas. That is all we need. We don't need fancy torches, we don't need fancy pickles, we don't need any fancy setup. This is the basics, and this will really do for 90 to 95% of your soldering jobs. Our torch here, I've got mine right by here. Always put the base onto it, because when you're working away and you want to put the torch down because you just want to look at something, you really want to have a base, otherwise it's going to fall over. So always put the base on it, always nice and safe. And that's the torch we use here on At the Bench. We also, and just to show you, this is all that we use. I've got my third hand that we've got by here. Let me put this out of the way just to show you exactly what we've got and how we use it. Okay, so that is our soldering kit. That is our torch. That is our third hand. Here's our soldering block. We've used this quite a few times. That's our soldering block. We've got our borax. Now this is what the borax cone will look like. It looks rather sad for itself. All around the outside of the cone here is dried borax. You need to put a little bit of water into this, and I will do that now for you. If I can find my water, there it is. Get the water, simply add about a teaspoon of water into the dish. Get the block, your borax cone, and rub it around and around the dish. And what happens, because it's unglazed, it's slightly rough, it'll abrade the borax cone, mix it up with the water. I'm taking it wide now to just try and get some of that borax off the outside edge. What you'll find is that the water will evaporate, and also the water will get absorbed into the dish slightly and also into the cone slightly. So you may find you have to keep adding water as you work through your particular piece. So you can see we've got quite a nice runny consistency, and you can see it looks very much like a runny sort of single cream. That is ideal. It needs to be nice and clean as we've got it here. So that's the borax. Just to show you, this is exactly what we use. The safety pickle, as I said, it's always nice to use it warm. So you can either have a slow cooker. You can buy these small little 1.5 litre slow cookers. They're around about 15–16 pounds, something like that. But it's quite a large piece of equipment to have upon your bench. My favourite is to get yourself, there we go, a baby bottle warmer. It's been a long time since my children were babies, but you can pick these little bottle warmers up really, really cheap in mother care and those sort of baby places. And within that, I've got a small little beaker. This is where my safety pickle is. And because there's a water bath, we can adjust the temperature using the control on the front, so we can be sure that our pickle is always a nice warm temperature, not a boiling hot, but a nice warm temperature, and the warmth helps the acid, the safety pickle, to get rid of all the oxides from the surface. Obviously that gets plugged in, but something like a nice little baby bottle warmer like that is absolutely ideal, and it's small enough to leave upon your bench as well. We've also got a small little dish. This is a little dish of water. You could do a little bit more water in that actually, because once you've got your piece and you've put it into the acid, it's always nice then to put your piece into some water. You can have a bit of an alkaline solution in there if you wanted, something like a bit of baking soda or baking powder if you wanted to in there. I don't normally do. I normally refresh the water every day, and when your piece comes out of the acid, swish it round in the water and then dry it off with a cloth. I'm talking of cloths. An old piece of rag would do, or anything like this. It can't be a good polishing cloth because sometimes the safety pickle will build up on the cloth and it'll start to rip where it starts to break down the fibers. So there we go. This is exactly what I use, and we use the baby bottle warmer with the acid in every single day. And this is our little setup that we've got. And what we've got here will give you absolute perfect solder joints. Remember, the technique is all about preparation of the joint. And that's what we're going to look at next.